If you've ever looked at a world map shaded by GDP per capita, you've probably noticed something. Many of the richest countries, places like the United States, Canada, Australia, Germany, the UK, the Nordic nations, are majority white. And that pattern might make you wonder, why is that? Is there some innate reason? The short answer is no. There's nothing biological that makes majority white countries richer. The long answer is that the reasons are tangled up in geography, history, colonialism, technology, political institutions, education, and centuries of interconnected events that stacked advantages in certain places and disadvantages in others. And if you follow that trail back through time, you find a story not of racial superiority, but of who had the right combination of conditions, timing, and power at key moments in history. So today, we're going to break this down, not with dry textbook jargon, but with a proper deep dive that blends big picture context with the kind of detail that'll make you feel like you've just binged an entire season of How the World Got This Way in one sitting. And yeah, we're going to do it in one long, unbroken rant. So settle in. Let's start with geography because it's the silent player in so much of human history. Majority white countries today are largely in temperate zones with climates that allowed for reliable agriculture thousands of years ago. Europe, for example, has fertile soil, moderate rainfall, and seasons that are long enough for crops but not so extreme they make survival impossible. Rivers like the Rhine, the Danube, and the Thames provided not just water but highways for trade and movement before there were cars or trains. And those coastlines, Europe's irregular, jagged coastline, gave it more access to the sea than almost any other continent. That meant more ports, more sailors, more ships, more trade. Compare that to huge inland territories or tropical regions where disease and unpredictable climate patterns made agriculture harder, or deserts where farming was extremely limited. Geography isn't destiny, but it's a big head start. Now layer on the fact that European countries are relatively close to each other, meaning competition and innovation spread fast. If one region figured out a better plow or a new crop rotation method, neighbors could see it, copy it, and improve on it. That competitive pressure is part of why Europe eventually surged ahead in technology. But geography alone doesn't explain modern wealth. For that, we have to talk about the Industrial Revolution, the single biggest economic shift in human history. In the late 1700s, Britain figured out how to harness coal and steam to power machines, and suddenly production exploded. Instead of a weaver making cloth by hand in days, machines could churn it out in hours. That meant more goods, lower costs, and higher profits. Being first at this game was like being first to invent the internet. It gave you a permanent edge. And because Britain was majority white and part of Europe, that edge spread to other majority white countries like Germany, France, and eventually across the Atlantic to the United States. Industrialization also meant railroads, steamships, and later telegraphs, which shrank the world and made trade faster. But here's where the story gets darker. Colonialism. For centuries, European powers didn't just trade with the rest of the world. They conquered, extracted, and controlled it. The British Empire, the French Empire, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, all majority white countries, used military and naval dominance to take resources from Africa, Asia, and the Americas. They didn't just take gold and silver, they took cotton, sugar, spices, timber, rubber, oil, and countless other resources. And they often used the labor of the people in those regions, either through outright slavery or exploitative systems that kept local populations poor. This funneling of wealth from colonized regions to the colonizers supercharged the economies of Europe and later settler colonies like the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The profits from these systems didn't just make a few kings and merchants rich. They funded infrastructure, banks, factories, and schools back home. That's one reason the industrializing majority white countries could keep investing in innovation, while much of the colonized world was kept in a state that served the colonizers' economy rather than its own. And when colonized nations eventually gained independence, they were often left with economies designed to export raw materials rather than produce finished goods, making it hard to compete on the same level. Another huge factor? Political stability and institutions. Many majority white countries developed systems of governance that, over time, not instantly, protected property rights, encouraged investment, and allowed relatively stable legal systems. This isn't to say they were perfect. Far from it. These systems often excluded women, minorities, and the poor for centuries. But compared to regions where governments were frequently overthrown or where colonial rule disrupted local governance entirely, the relative stability of European institutions gave businesses and investors confidence to take risks. And political stability feeds economic growth like a feedback loop. The more stable the environment, the easier it is to plan for the future, build infrastructure, and attract skilled workers. Education also plays a massive role. Starting in the late 19th century, many majority-white countries began implementing compulsory public education. This meant higher literacy rates, which in turn fueled innovation, entrepreneurship, and the ability to adopt new technologies. By the mid-20th century, the United States and much of Western Europe had large percentages of their populations not just literate but trained in technical skills, which made adapting to new industries, from cars to computers, much faster. Then there's the post-World War II order. After 1945, many majority-white countries, especially in Western Europe and North America, benefited from the Marshall Plan, NATO, and a global trade system that they largely designed. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency, giving the United States enormous economic influence. International institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund were created with heavy input from these countries, often favoring the economic models and trade rules that benefited industrialized economies. Meanwhile, many former colonies were dealing with the economic hangover of colonialism and Cold War proxy conflicts and limited access to capital. Technology and innovation have also been disproportionately concentrated in majority-white countries for historical reasons. Once you have universities, research labs, and companies with the capital to take risks, you get a cycle of innovation that keeps you ahead. Silicon Valley didn't pop up in California by accident. It grew out of decades of government research funding, military contracts, and a culture of entrepreneurship in a wealthy, stable, industrialized country. And once you're ahead technologically, you can export high-value goods and services rather than relying on low-value raw materials. But all of this is interconnected. Geography gave certain regions early agricultural advantages. Those advantages, plus proximity to trade routes, helped them industrialize first. Industrialization plus colonial wealth extraction created massive surpluses that were reinvested in infrastructure, education, and technology. Stable political systems encouraged investment and innovation. Post-war institutions reinforced the advantages of those already at the top, and technological leadership made it easier to stay there. It's important to remember, though, that not all majority-white countries are equally rich. Eastern Europe, for example, was under communist rule for much of the 20th century and industrialized differently, so its GDP per capita is generally lower than Western Europe's. And there are non-majority white countries like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore that have become very wealthy despite not having the same colonial advantages. Though in some cases they benefited from the different historical factors, such as US military protection or strategic geographic positions for trade. So the takeaway here is this: the wealth of majority white countries today is not about race. It's about a series of historical and geographic advantages compounded over centuries, often at the expense of others. It's about who industrialized first, who controlled global trade, who wrote the rules of the modern economy, and who had the stability and resources to keep compounding that wealth over generations. And understanding that history isn't just about pointing fingers, it's about recognizing the systems that created the inequalities we see today, so that maybe we can figure out how to make the playing field less tilted in the future.